All right. Hello, Sandra Barber. How are you?
Good. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining me on this bonus content for Phantom History. And for those who are watching and listening, Sandra Barber is a ghost tour guide over in St. Augustine who has had a number of experiences. And before I say any more, Sandra, I'll let you introduce yourself. When somebody asks you, what do you do? How do you introduce yourself?
Well, Steve, my name is Sandra Barber. I'm a ghost guide. I actually take you to haunted locations in St. Augustine. We tell a little bit of a history, a little bit of mystery, kind of the darker side of St. Augustine. And all of our tours are unscripted, so all of us guides actually have to learn the history of St. Augustine and figure out some our own stories, which is really cool because we get a chance to see different things that most people don't.
I love to hear that because I know so many tour groups use a script and then the tour guides kind of build off of that. So this sounds very unique in that it's your own research that you're sharing.
Yes, yes, and that's the best thing about it is that we have to do our own research, and when we find out things about St. Augustine that we can actually share that people don't know, I think it's a really cool thing to do.
Well, and speaking of St. Augustine, I think what everybody knows about St. Augustine is that it's the oldest city in the country. But that's really kind of all people know. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's the oldest city in the nation and it's over 500 years old. So it would be hard pressed not to find a place that was haunted in St. Augustine.
Right? Because there's a long history there for sure.
Exactly, exactly. And the fort's been there for since the 1600s. So, St. Augustine has gone through its ups and downs. The city was actually burned in 1740. So we only have five original buildings besides the fort that are actual buildings from the 1700s.
And
So
what's so neat about that, if I remember right, again, it's been a couple years since I've been there. They're kind of all on that same strip, right? The original building.
most, yeah, most of them are right around the old city,
Mhm.
um, St. George Street and San Marco and all that area. There's two cemeteries in town that are original. They've been there. One of them, the Talamato, has been there since 1777. And both of them were closed in 1884. So, those are the oldest cemeteries around. But like I said, it's all in that area right around St. George.
Now, when somebody says a cemetery has been closed, what does that mean?
The cemeteries, they closed them in 1884, which basically means that nobody else is allowed to be buried in the cemetery. Um, when they closed them, they don't open them to the public now. They're only open one day a month, and I think it's the third Saturday of the month, and they're only open for a few hours. And part of that reason is because the cemeteries had a lot of damage to them, and most of the graves that are in those cemeteries are only a couple feet deep.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, so that's been a big issue too, especially with the water table.
Okay. Well, that was going to be my follow-up question. Why are they so shallow? It is because of the water table.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, the cemeteries, they try to keep people out of them for the damage purposes. There's a lot of chance of somebody actually damaging graves. So that's why they don't open them. As far as them being closed in 1884, they thought that there was an issue with burying people inside the city, that it would cause problems, health things like that. So they quit using those cemeteries and actually built cemeteries outside of the city. So, and the one of the fun facts about St. Augustine is the two cemeteries that are actually in town are one of them, the Huguenot, which is over by the parking garage. That one is technically, or was back in the 1800s, outside of city limits because the original walls ran down Orange Street. So that would have been outside of the city walls.
And
So
of course, these cities, grow, and then suddenly what was outside the walls is now downtown.
yes, exactly. So that's why the Huguenot is actually, it's considered part of downtown, but like I said, back in the 1800s, it was actually considered outside of city limits. Now, in order to be buried inside city limits, you had to be Spanish Catholic. So, yes, so if you weren't Spanish Catholic, you were buried outside of the city.
What does, I think I know what Spanish Catholic means, but what does that mean?
The Catholic faith, most of the Spanish that actually came to St. Augustine had very deep Catholic faith roots. And if you were not part of that Spanish Catholic unity, then they would actually bury you outside of city limits.
So very, very specific and very, very specific rules.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I know that the cemeteries are extremely popular for tours and for activity. And I have to ask you, as a guide or just as somebody roaming the city, have you encountered anything in those cemeteries? What have you seen?
Yes, in the Talamado Cemetery, I actually, there's a little boy that's buried in the Talamado Cemetery. His name is James Patrick Morgan. Now, when he passed away, he actually fell out of the tree that's right there at the gate, and he broke his neck and passed away. Now, he was 5 years old when he passed away, and many, many people have actually seen James up in the tree. He sits in the tree. He likes to taunt people from the tree. I actually feel James when I'm there, but nothing really, I haven't really seen him. But my biggest thing that I have actually seen at the Talamado Cemetery was I was walking up the fence line and I caught this black shadow out of the corner of my eye. And I couldn't figure out what it was. It was just tall and dark. And it went from the front of the cemetery to the back of the cemetery. And there's a mausoleum over there with a palm tree, and it was standing like right next to the palm tree. And because the cemeteries are closed, I knew that no one was supposed to be in there. And this was Halloween night that I actually saw this. So I thought somebody had actually climbed over the fence and was in the cemetery when they weren't supposed to be. It was Halloween night. I figured they were trying to trick somebody. But there was no one there. And we couldn't find any evidence that there was anybody in the cemetery. So I went ahead and went to finish my tour. And about 20 minutes after I had left, there was another group that came out. And there was a woman on that tour, and she actually saw the same thing I did, but she got a picture of it. And I sent that picture to you.
She did. And that was so eerie because you can kind of, if I remember right, it's near that palm tree or near a tree.
Yes, it's right near the tree. And it's like really tall. It looks like it has, I mean, honestly, I think it looks like an old priest is what it looked like to me. And that makes sense because there is a story about how the Talamado Native Americans that were there, that was originally their village. And the priests would come in and try to convert them, convert them to Christianity. And when they wouldn't convert, they actually fought back and they killed a priest on the property. So I'm assuming that that's who I actually saw was the priest that was there. But
So
there's been
the priest who was killed.
Yes. So, and there's been a lot of crazy pictures and photographs. I mean, if you go on Google, look up Talamado Cemetery, there's tons of photos of apparitions. I actually have one more picture that I took. I didn't, one of my guests took, of the Talamato Cemetery. And in the cemetery, you can actually see the white mausoleum with the light. And next to it, you can actually see a figure that looks almost like a skeleton. And I have that photo as well. So, I mean, there's just crazy things that happen in that cemetery all the time.
It sounds extremely active. And I want to go back for a second to James,
Okay. Yes.
the young boy, the 5-year-old. You
Yes.
told me during our initial phone call about his specific grave and why it's kind of unique from the others. Can you tell me a little bit about that again?
Yeah, his grave sits in the front of the cemetery, and his parents actually purchased all the lots in the front to be buried with James. But when the cemetery closed in 1884, no one was allowed to be buried in there after that. So his parents were not actually buried in that cemetery with him. His parents and his 7 brothers and sisters were actually buried in Texas. So they're not there. So James is actually there all by himself. And there's a little tombstone right out front, and you can see it when you walk up to the fence line. It's right there in the front, and it's the only one in that area. So he is out there all by himself.
Do you recall what year he passed away? Can you see that on the tombstone?
It was 1877 was the year that James passed. And he was 5, like I said, so he was quite young. But back then in 1877, the whole cemetery was a lot different. There was no fence around it. The trees were a lot smaller, especially that one in the front where he climbed all the time. But he'd climb up there and he'd throw rocks at people. So that's what he used to do, So, but I've had, I've had guests on my tour. There was a little girl. She was so cute. She was 6 years old, and she had learned about James. Her mom told her about James, and her mom and her had done some research, and then they came and took my tour. And that little girl actually wrote a letter to James, and she left it at the cemetery for him that night on my tour. And I thought that was just the sweetest thing.
It is extremely sweet. And did she share what was in the letter with you?
No, she didn't tell me what was in it. She said that it was private between him and her, and that she just felt bad because he was only 5. So
and all alone. And you said that you could you haven't seen him, but you can feel him. Do you think
I can feel him
because he's alone?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, that he just wants to be known. He wants to play. He wants to interact. And we do a lot of, because not only do I do the ghost tours, but I also do the educational tours for the kids during the day. And we have a lot of kids that come into St. Augustine because it's part of the Florida curriculum to learn about St. Augustine, especially the 4th grade. So we have tons of kids in town all day, every day. And I think that with James, when those kids go over near that cemetery or they're in town, that energy ramps him up because he just wants to play. He wants to play with the other kids. So I've had people who have told me they've gotten tugged. They walk by and it felt like somebody tugged on their shirt. Things like that. I think that amps it up. And same with the little girl I told you about, Elizabeth, who is at the city gate. I think that all of that energy in town just ramps all of it.
Well, let's shift to Elizabeth. Tell me a little bit about her and the city gate.
Elizabeth, she's one of our most famous ghosts in town. A lot of people have seen Elizabeth. They come in and ask us who the child actor is at the city gates, and we don't have any child actors in town. She has been known to play out there at night. She'll skip around at the city gates and wave at traffic as they're driving by. So the police department's been called many times about a lost child at the city gate, and it turns out to be Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, the story that goes around town about Elizabeth is true, but it's not true. the research that I've done, Elizabeth, they say, is the gatekeeper's daughter. Now the gatekeeper did have a daughter named Elizabeth, but she was 17 years old when she passed away. Now this child that we see at the city gates is about 20. So I knew it couldn't be the same child. So I was trying to figure out who this child was. And I actually went with one of my other guides, and we went to the Historic Society. And we actually came across an article about a little girl who passed away from yellow fever in 1821. Her parents couldn't afford the $4 to bury her. So they took her to the city gates and left her there, hoping the city would take her. And they did. They buried her in the Huguenot. But when they buried her in the Huguenot, this little girl didn't have a name. And she was a Jane Doe. So the historians really felt bad because she didn't have a name, and they gave her the name Elizabeth. And that's how it got confused with the gatekeeper's daughter.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was a crazy story.
And you said she was 12? Is that what you said?
She was 12, yeah, when she passed away. And I actually found the article. I have the article somewhere. But the Historic Society was really helpful getting us that information. Because I just couldn't make that story work for me, with the gatekeeper's daughter. And I was like, that is not the same child. I actually use a lot of times, especially on my tours, I talk to Elizabeth every night. So when I'm out there, I work 6 nights a week. And when I'm out there, I always use the dowsing rods. And I always talk to Elizabeth at the same time. And she answers me every single time.
That's amazing. Now, what does she say? Is she happy? Is she malevolent?
She seems to be very happy. She likes making new friends. She likes hanging out with people. I usually ask her, I say, Elizabeth, if you're here, can you cross the rods? And she'll cross them up, and I'll say, well, can you uncross them? And she'll open them wide open. And then I'll say, can you show me where you're at? And she'll show me. She'll move the rods and point to where she's at. So it kind of freaks some of the people out on my tours because she's standing next to them, but it's a fun thing to do. And Elizabeth is so much fun to talk to. And I've actually gone out there and tried to get her real name because I know it's not Elizabeth. But I think she's been so used to being called Elizabeth, she just accepts that as her name. So,
right. It's challenging to have a conversation because all you can really ask is your name and say something. And that's really all you can do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I can take a ghost box out there, but it's really not going to do any good with a ghost box because there's so much traffic going by and it's so loud right there that it's hard to be able to hear anything. You know what I mean? So it's easier for me to have a conversation with her with the dowsing rods than it is to actually bring a spirit box or anything like that.
And the other amazing part of that story is that a funeral was $4.
Yeah, it was $4 back then.
Which I know, it was a different time, but wow, $4 for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think, you talked about bringing in kids, especially at the fourth graders in that age?
Yeah,
I've been
absolutely.
talking to a lot of tour guides and paranormal investigators that children are especially sensitive to spiritual energy. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I see that more and more, especially children and animals. Animals are a big thing. I think animals are more susceptible to seeing things and hearing things than we are. I actually have a 3-pound little dog. And the other night I was sitting at the house and I was in my living room, and my living room and kitchen is all open. There's like a bar area that goes into my kitchen. And the bedroom is like right off the living room. And the dog was sitting in my lap and she was growling at the door, at the bedroom door. And I was like, what are you growling at? So I couldn't figure it out. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to put him to bed. So I went and put him in the crates, and I went and sat back down in the living room. And there was a shadow figure that actually walked through my kitchen and blocked out my stove light. And I was like, okay, I see you. Now go away. But yeah, I see it with animals all the time. And you'll get dogs that are downtown that people will be walking their dogs and they'll go through the city gates and they'll kind of switch around and look and they're like, like they're reacting to something.
Right.
Um, the kids, I think, for the most part, unless we're doing a kids ghost tour, they don't really pay any attention during the day. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
If we're doing a kids ghost tour, it's kind of different because they're in that atmosphere. So they're more susceptible. But
Right. Now, with your experience in your home with the shadow figure that blocked out your light, are you close to like downtown St. Augustine? And do you know
yeah,
what that is in your house?
I don't know what it is. I've been here almost a year. And that's the only thing I've seen in the house. But I'm 4 miles from downtown. So I live right off on King Street. So it's one of those things where I'm not far. So I don't know exactly what it is. Sometimes I wonder if Elizabeth followed me home, you know, because her and I communicate so much. But even if it's something like her or whatever it is, I don't communicate with it. Kind of I just kind of ignore it. Because of the fact that if it is negative, I don't want to know, for one. And for two, if it is negative, the more you feed into it, the worse it's going to get. So I just kind of ignore it and let it go. I stage the house once a week.
All right.
Leave it at that.
Well, and I know that your tours, I've been on a few tours in St. Augustine. I don't think I've taken the one you do, obviously. But there's more than just the cemeteries there. I mean, I know those are like the big attractions because they're just out there for everybody to see. But there are so many
Absolutely.
historic locations in there, like in the city proper of St. Augustine, that I know there's
Yeah.
more spirits. You mentioned an inn that is the most haunted area, I think you said, in St. Augustine. Tell me a little bit
Yeah,
about
Saint Francis Inn, Lily's room in Saint Francis Inn. I don't have a whole lot of history about Lily's room. I just know that that's one of the ones that's been advertised a lot as being extremely haunted. I know the Saint Francis Inn has talked to us about Lily's room, and I believe the woman Lily that was there actually committed suicide. So I think that's part of the reason why it's so haunted. But like I said, the St. Augustine, it would be hard pressed not to find a place that's haunted. The Casa de Sueños is the old morgue. That is now the House of Dreams. It's an inn.
it was the old morgue. Is that what you
It
said?
was the old morgue in 1901. It was the old morgue.
Wow.
So, there's just so many stories in St. Augustine of all the places that are crazy haunted. Even what is the name of that? There's one on San Marco, and it's one of the big chain hotels. I remember the name of it now. But there's children that run through the hallways at night in that hotel, and nobody can figure out who it is. Pictures get knocked off the walls. It's crazy. I
Wow.
mean, all the stuff that happens. Scarlett O'Hara's, which is a bar, that place is extremely haunted, especially on the second floor.
If I remember right,
So
there's a bathtub that plays into that story. Am I right? Am I
yes,
thinking about that?
so yes, the woman killed her husband in the bathtub, and her husband haunts Carlo. And
It-
they actually have a table for him in the bar downstairs where nobody's at. It's just an empty table for him.
so can you expand on that a little bit for me? Who were they, and what tragic? It's something tragic that happened there. Obviously, do you know that story?
Yeah. Well, she found out that he was cheating on her with a younger woman. and she actually got him upstairs. She drew him a bath. He went into the bathtub, and she went in there and pushed him under and drowned him in the bathtub upstairs in the room, in the bathroom. Now that I think, now don't quote me on this because I'm not really sure, but I think that that was originally a pub, and that this guy owned that pub. And one of the patrons that came in ended up having an affair with, and his wife found out.
So is it he that haunts it, or does she haunt it, or are they both there?
I think he does mostly. I don't think she's there as much. I think he is. Like I said, they've got a table downstairs in the bar where they keep it empty just for him.
Well, that's
Yeah,
the thing that's so fascinating about St. Augustine, is that it fully embraces not only its history, but its hauntings as well, which is amazing to me.
absolutely. Absolutely. And the place is so steeped in history, and you can just feel it. I mean, you feel it everywhere you walk downtown. And, even if you're not interested in the paranormal, there's still so much history there that it's unreal. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So between Flagler College and, you know, Flagler, which is extremely haunted, it's haunted by Mrs. Flagler, um, and the fort and all the lighthouse. I mean, the lighthouse is extremely haunted. There's three little girls that haunt the lighthouse. There's just so many things in St. Augustine. We could do 3 hours of St. Augustine history,
This is a
so
15-part episode because there's so much.
right.
Well, another iconic landmark, of course, is the fort that is there.
Yes.
I have been in the fort. I've toured it. It's beautiful for one, and you can feel the
Yes.
history there. But I also hear that it's very haunted.
It is very haunted, and most of the hauntings, from what I've seen, have actually been soldiers. I have a lot of pictures of people who take pictures of the full fort and get apparitions in the fort. And most of them, one of them in particular, you can actually see a red and white. So most of the ones that are haunting the fort are soldiers, I believe. We do have a story about Osceola, who was the Indian chief that was here. Um, he was imprisoned in the fort. Uh, he got sick, I believe, with yellow fever. And instead of keeping him at the fort because they thought he was actually contagious, they sent him off to North Carolina with our Dr. Wheaton. And Dr. Wheaton befriended him and took care of him in North Carolina. And then when Osceola passed away, our Dr. Wheaton got access to his body, decapitated him, took his head, and brought it back to St. Augustine to keep on his desk.
Why? Why would you decapitate?
I have no idea. It's crazy. And he kept that on his desk. He used to punish his kids at night by sticking it on the nightstand when they've been bad.
Really?
He gave it to his youngest daughter when she got married. He gave it to her as a wedding present. And she actually took the head to New Jersey, and she ended up donating it to a museum in New Jersey. And 2 weeks after they donated it, the museum burnt to the ground. They couldn't find it. So that's another one that's actually haunts the fort. They say they see Osceola's head up above the fort, floating by itself, looking for its body. So that's another one. There is also a story of a couple that were in the fort. I believe it was the governor's wife, had an affair with a soldier at the fort. And if you've been in the fort, do you know the room down in the bottom where you kind of have to climb under the tunnel, in a little tunnel to go into the room? So I believe that was a magazine room, but in the back there was a wall that cut that room almost in half, and nobody could figure out what that wall was. They said that the room was smaller than it was supposed to be. Nobody knew what was going on. So the story that I know is that governor, his wife, fell in love with this. Now the governor caught them together, and she refused to give up her lover. So the governor said, if you're going to be with him, you're going to be with him forever. So he took him and put him in the fort, in that room, chained her to one side and him to the other side, and worked it up.
Wow.
So when that wall was excavated, they actually found bones inside that room, and it was a female chained to one side and a male chained.
Now, what era are we talking? Like, soldier was what? Confederate, Spanish? How far back are we talking?
No, it was a Spanish soldier.
Okay.
So, and it was the governor's wife, and he was Spanish, Menendez. So, I believe it was right around the 1700s, early 1800s, somewhere in there. But they did actually have an archaeologist come out and estimate the wall when they found it. I guess from my understanding is there was cannon on top of the fort that actually fell in through the roof, and the barrel punctured that back there, and that's how they realized it was behind it.
So people didn't even really know that wall was there until that happened.
No, until that happened. And then they sent the archaeologist out, they excavated the wall, actually found the bones and the chains in that room. So, you know,
What a
I'm not
horrible
sure,
That's horrible.
you know, yeah, it is a horrible story, and I'm really not sure exactly who this was. I just know that that's the story I've been about it being the governor's wife. So, yeah. So there's, I mean, unbelievable things that happen at that fort.
Yeah, I mean, I know the fort has been under attack many times from the water.
Yes.
I mean, I know it's seen a lot in its life, and the fact that it's still there is amazing.
Exactly. And that's not the first fort. I mean, there was 9 other forts there before that one. And most of them were actually made of wood. So they were either destroyed by termites or hurricanes or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's when they started building the Cortina fort, with because the other forts being destroyed like that.
Right, and coquina is the shell mix, right?
Yes, it's shell, limestone, and baby sea creatures that then compress under the ocean for a long, long time.
Right.
So yeah, that's what coquina is.
Yeah, and I also, again, just from the time I went there, I remember touring it and them saying that that actually helped preserve it as well during war because the impact of like a cannonball could be absorbed
Yes,
rather than shattered. Is that correct?
exactly. Yes. Coquina is very porous. It holds water. So it's like a soft stone, like a limestone or something like that, that absorbs things. So if a cannonball did hit it, it would absorb it into the hole and it would just hold it. But some of those walls are 19 feet thick. So there wouldn't be much of a way for a cannonball to actually get in there anyway. So it would just hold it, and the Spanish would come out at night and pick them out and cover it back up with the coquina.
It's like nothing,
So
nothing.
they thought, yeah, they thought we had a magical fort. It would heal itself.
Oh, that's amazing. That's its whole other legend and lore right there, a magical fort.
Exactly.
I know one of the other iconic places in St. Augustine is the schoolhouse. I've not been in it,
Absolutely.
but I've been by it. I don't know that much about it, and I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit more. Are you familiar
Well,
with the picture and the stories there?
yeah, the schoolhouse is from 1760. It is one of the original 5 in the town that are original buildings. The schoolhouse is actually right next to our tour. So it's right next door.
Perfect.
We share the back courtyard with them. So we investigate. We actually do a tour, which is called a paranormal encounter. And we take people ghost hunting. And when we take them ghost hunting, we take them into the old schoolhouse and we take them into the courtyard. So the schoolhouse is extremely haunted. There's a couple reasons I think that it's haunted. And one is because that schoolhouse was not only used as a schoolhouse, but in 1821, when we had yellow fever strike St. Augustine and it killed 1 in every 3 people, we actually had Spanish sentries that were stationed at the city gates. They wouldn't let people in if they looked sick, because they didn't want to spread yellow fever any further. But yellow fever wasn't spread by person to person. It was spread by mosquitoes. So it really didn't matter, but the Spanish sentries that were actually stationed at the gates, they were housed in the old wooden school. So that's where they would stay overnight, and then they would open it back up and use it for the school during the day. So we think that the Spanish soldiers are actually still there, haunting the schoolhouse. Plus, we have the school teacher that is still there, and I actually have a picture of her that was walking up on one of the tour guides with books, carrying books, to the front door of the schoolhouse. So there's a lot of, I think that a lot of that is residual, but we do see it a lot at the school.
Have you encountered anything personally there in the schoolhouse?
Not at the schoolhouse, but in the tour shop next door.
Okay.
Yeah. Me and one of the girls that's actually on my paranormal team, we were in the tour shop and we were talking to some tour guests, and we were talking about the dowsing rods, and I was actually showing them how to use the dowsing rods. And we were getting evidence in the tour shop with the dowsing rods. So it was one of those things where, it was kind of by accident, but it happens all the time in there. Things have gotten moved. I was in there one night after my tour getting my bag together, and the computer turned on by itself. And I was like, okay, what the heck? So, things like that, little things like that happen all the time right there.
Yeah.
And like I said, we share a courtyard to the school. So, the back courtyard of the school. And I've actually seen things back there. I've taken pictures and got lights that showed up that weren't out there. They were kind of streaking, and just kind of weird photos in that courtyard.
Oh, well, and it almost seems like that whatever is still in St. Augustine wants to be known that it's still there, because it seems like no matter where you are, something is nearby and it's ready to communicate.
Exactly. And Steve, to be honest, my feelings behind the haunting, my belief behind it, is that these spirits are not stuck like people think they are. I think that a lot of these spirits go through a grieving process like we do when they pass away, and especially if it's tragic and quick, they go through that grieving process, but somehow they get stuck in that grieving process. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of push to help them get through that grieving process. But to me, I think a lot of the spirits in St. Augustine want to be there. They want to be known. They want to show people that they're there. And I just think it's a cool place. It really is. It's just a cool place.
It is a very, very cool place. And another cool thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up is your paranormal team.
Yes.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk about this unique team that you're a part of. Tell me about it.
Yes. We just started the team. We have an all-female team. And even our camera person is female. So I'm quite excited about that. I think, honestly, men, they're good at what they do with the paranormal. But in some ways, I think that the females are a little more sensitive to the paranormal. So I'm excited about this team, and we're going to be doing a YouTube channel. Social media is going to be up soon, and we are filming next week, and I can't wait. going to the Pirate Museum in St. Augustine, and we're actually going to do an episode there. So I am so excited.
That's amazing. What is the name of the team? Do you have a name yet?
It's Ancient City Paranormal.
Ancient City Paranormal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and we are
to
going to be part of, Ancient City Paranormal. And our tour group, our tour company actually owns a ghostly encounter, which is where we do our ghost tours. And they own Paranormal Encounter, which is the paranormal ghost hunt that we do for people at night. So we will be working with them as well. So not only our team is not only part of the tour shop, we're also trying to give back to the community, because the fact is we are tour guides. We do make a lot of money in St. Augustine, and we want to give back to the community. So we're actually starting this paranormal team so that we can help people with paranormal issues in St. Augustine and not charge them. Go to private residents, take care of their paranormal, do the best we can to remove the paranormal from the house if that's what they want, and help them out and give back to the community. But we will be also working with the tour shop as doing some big events so that we can actually have people come in, stay in St. Augustine, and do some big paranormal events in St. Augustine. So we're working on all of that at this point. And like I said, during our conversation on the phone, we're working on trying to get a few episodes ahead to put on our new YouTube channel. So yeah, we're working on that now, and I'm so excited.
And believe me, I know how that works. I'm doing the same thing here. So
yeah, exactly.
And I love that you brought up, private residences, because St. Augustine is known for these iconic structures, the fort, the schoolhouse, etc. But that city is so old, there's such a history there that things are built on places that may have their own story. Do you think that's where these other private residences are running into things?
Absolutely. And I have posted a few things on YouTube, on Facebook, trying to get people to contact us to let us know if they're having experiences in their houses. And I've actually gotten a lot of response. But you know how things are nowadays. People are concerned. They're worried about letting people in their house, things like that. So, the one thing that I've been very clear with everybody is that our team is a very professional team. We're licensed tour guides in St. Augustine. So we do have to get licensed. And we actually have insurance, and, we've taken care of every step that we need to take care of to make sure that people are safe and we're safe. So being an all-female team. So when we meet somebody for the first time, we meet at a public place. We talk about it. And then if they're comfortable, then they can get in touch with us and go to them. But that's been a major issue at this point. People wanting to come forward because they're worried. They don't know us, and they're worried about letting people in. So, and that's a big thing. It really is. And I hate to say that, but it's been a major issue. So, but like I said, I've gotten a lot of response. I'm just waiting to hear back from people so we can get together and see if we can get it worked out.
And as a friend of mine told me once, he's more concerned about the living than the dead.
Exactly. Exactly.
I completely understand. Before we wrap up, like you said, we could talk about St. Augustine for hours because there's so much there, and I do want to talk to you about it again after you check out the Pirate Museum and some other locations. But is there anything that we didn't touch on, or any specific story or experience that you had that you wanted to make sure that you shared?
The only thing that we haven't really talked about was the lighthouse, and that's a major hotspot for people. There's footsteps in the lighthouse. They've been seeing shadow figures in the lighthouse. I have not had any experiences of the lighthouse, but a lot of people have, and I think a lot of that's because of the three little girls that were at the lighthouse that were the lighthouse keeper's daughters, and they were playing on a little cart, and it had tracks on it, and the tracks went to the ocean. And they were playing in the cart, and the cart went into the ocean, and all three little girls drowned. So they do see them a lot at the lighthouse. And that's, people always want to go see the lighthouse. But the lighthouse is about 1.5 mile walk from where we do our tour.
Yeah, it's across the bridge.
Exactly. So across the Bridge of Lions. But yeah, you can see the lighthouse from the fort, and people always mention it. Like I said, I just haven't had any experiences of it, but I know it's extremely haunted.
Well, I will say that prior to 2020, or maybe in 2020, I spoke with a tour guide at the lighthouse and did an episode. And she shared some of her experiences, which were amazing. So I've been there, and I can't wait to go back again. And again, you can be in St. Augustine, walk 3 feet, and do another episode because there's something there.
Exactly. I mean, there's just so many, like Judge Stickney at the Huguenot, and we see him all the time at the Huguenot, and there's just so many different things. That cemetery, the Huguenot cemetery, was a lot bigger than it is today.
Expand on, you said that there's a judge in the Huguenot?
Yes, Judge Stickney. Judge Stickney was he was not only the judge, but at one point he was a district attorney, and he was the state attorney, and he was a widower. He had 3 kids, and he used to make a lot of trips back and forth to Washington, D.C. One of his trips to Washington, he caught typhoid, and it killed him, and they shipped him back to St. Augustine to be buried in the cemetery. And his stone is, if you're looking at it, there's a tree there, and his stone is right next to the tree, and it's really tall, and it looks like a chest.
It looks like a what? I'm sorry?
A chest piece, like
okay.
chest, yeah. So Judge Stickney, when they shipped him back to be buried here, the problem was he had the kids, and he had nobody to take care of the kids. So the kids were shipped to Washington to live with his best friend. And then 21 years later, the kids, the best friend, Judge Long, passed away. And the kids wanted their dads in the same place where they could visit them together. Well, they were going to dig up Judge Stickney and send him off to Washington. The gravedigger came in, got him up out of the ground, and he's waiting on the carriage to come. And there was 2 grave robbers that actually snuck into the cemetery, and they vandalized his grave. They opened his coffin, they took his pocket watch, they took his wedding ring, which was major important, and they took all the bones and just screwed them all around the coffin. And they got to his head, they pulled his head out, and he had a mouthful of gold. So they proceeded to pull every single one of his teeth. In the process, they caved in half the side of his head. So all those bones got mushed down into the ground, and the gravedigger realized what's going on, chases them out, couldn't catch them, comes back, puts all the bones back in the coffin that he can gather, closes the lid, and ships it off, hoping that nobody opens it, gets there. But because of that reason, because of the reason that his teeth were missing, and because all those little bones got mushed down into the ground, we actually see Judge a lot, and he's always pacing back and forth in front of his stone.
So he's always pacing back and forth. Do you think he's lost, confused, angry?
I think he's angry, and I think he's kind of lost. I don't think that he really wants to, but he feels like he has to be. And Judge Stickney was very well loved in St. Augustine. So I think that's part of the reason why he's here too, is he wants,
Right. And again,
it's his home, you know, so.
Yeah, and you said that about so many of these encounters and these spirits is I want to be there. This is home.
Yeah.
This is where they want to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But I think it's hard for him because I think he battles that, whether he wants to be here or if he wants, you know, I think that's what the issue is. That's why he faces. Now, we use, I don't know if you've heard of this, but we use an app. It's called GhostTube and GhostTube SLS. And I actually have a picture, and I'll send this to you as well. I'll stick it on the screen so you can see it. We use this camera in this cemetery in the Huguenot. And in this picture, one of the girls that was actually on my tour was taking pictures with that SLS camera. And in this picture, you can't actually see the stone, but you can also see the stick figure on the phone. Can you see it?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So it's like right there.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So I will send you this picture, but this picture, it struck me funny because the fact is that we know that Judge Stickney had his head caved in, right? And that half of those bones were gone. If you look at this picture very closely, again, that stick figure has no head.
Okay, which makes sense.
So it would make sense to be Judge Stickney.
Wow.
So, you know, things like that are just crazy. It's crazy.
It's a lot to be a coincidence, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know. It's just insane.
So again, Sandra, as you said, there's so much history in St. Augustine. We could go on forever. I encourage anybody who's watching this to find Sandra Barber, find the tour groups over there, find her team if you need an investigation done. And Sandra, I can't thank you enough for sharing all these stories. There's so much history and so much eeriness in St. Augustine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I wish you nothing but the best on the new ventures. I do plan to get over to St. Augustine in the near future, so I hope to meet you in person soon.
Absolutely. Come investigate with us.
Absolutely. I would love that. And I can't wait to share some of your photos as well that you've talked about. So stay safe. Good luck with all the new ventures, and I'll check in with you in the near future to figure out what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. You're welcome. Hey everybody, Steve here again. I hope you enjoyed that bonus content. If you have any ideas for an episode or your own paranormal experience you'd like to share with me, let me know through the phantomhistory.com website.